I stood there, frozen in the doorway of my own barn, watching hundreds of strangers in formal attire seated in perfect rows. White satin ribbons hung from the rafters my late husband had installed with his bare hands. Crystal chandeliers, dangled where our hay pulleys used to be. And there, beneath the oak beam where we'd carved our initials 40 years ago, stood my niece Rebecca in a wedding gown that probably cost more than our entire property tax for the year. The blood drained from my face as the string quartet stopped mid-note. 200 heads turned toward me, my muddy work boots, and the border collie panting at my side. That's when I heard the priest say something that made the entire crowd gasp. I believe the actual owner of this property has just arrived. The invitation had never come. That's what haunts me the most, even now. Not a phone call, not a text, not even one of those digital invites the kids send nowadays. Nothing. My own family had decided to use Blue Creek Ranch, my home, my livelihood, my heart for Rebecca's wedding without so much as asking me if it was all right. The ranch that Harold and I had poured 47 years of sweat and tears into. The same ranch that Rebecca's mother, my sister Diana, had called a waste of good real estate at our last Thanksgiving dinner. I suppose I should start from the beginning, before my world turned upside down that Saturday in June. Blue Creek Ranch has been in my husband's family for 3 generations. When Harold passed 5 years ago, I became the sole owner of our 180 acres in Montana's Paradise Valley. Not the fancy part where the celebrities buy up land, mind you, but the working part where real ranchers still raise cattle and grow hay and fight with the bank every other season. Harold and I never had children of our own. We had the land, the animals, and each other. That was enough. My sister Diana took a different path. She married Robert Sanderson, a real estate developer from Boston, and they raised 3 children in a suburb of Chicago with all the country club memberships and private schools money could buy. Our relationship had always been strained, but we maintained the polite facade families often do. Diana visited the ranch exactly twice in 40 years, once for our wedding and once when our parents died. Her children, now adults with children of their own, were practically strangers to me. Rebecca, her youngest, was the only one who occasionally sent Christmas cards. I still have every one of them displayed on my refrigerator with those fruit-shaped magnets Harold bought me at a gas station in 1997. They were the only connection I had to that branch of my family tree. Perhaps that's why what happened cut so deep. April had been unusually wet that year, and I was behind on everything. The fence along the east pasture needed mending, the barn roof had developed a leak, and my arthritic knees weren't making any of it easier. I'd hired Toby Jensen's boy to help with the heavy lifting, but he could only come on weekends. It was tough going, but we were managing. "Miss Margaret," he'd said to me one Saturday, "there was some fancy car driving around the property yesterday when I was in town. Thought you should know." I dismissed it as probably just tourists looking for the entrance to Yellowstone. Paradise Valley gets all types in the summer, especially the ones who think every dirt road is their personal scenic byway. I didn't think much of it until about a week later, when UPS delivered a package that wasn't mine. The label said Wedding Planner LLC and was addressed to my ranch, but with Diana's name on it. I called Diana immediately, but the call went straight to voicemails. It always did when she saw my number. I left a message. "Dee, there's a package here for you. Care to explain why your name is on mail coming to my address?" 3 days passed. No response. I should have opened that package. Maybe things would have turned out differently if I had. But I was raised not to open other people's mail, so I just set it on the counter and tried not to think about it. On the first Tuesday in May, I drove into town for my monthly grocery run and to deposit a small check from selling a pair of yearling heifers. Bobsman had changed so much over the decades that sometimes I hardly recognized it. All these new coffee shops and boutiques, catering to the out-of-towners, I preferred the old hardware store that still had the original wooden floors and smelled like metal and motor oil. Judy, who'd been working the checkout at Corner Grocery for as long as I could remember, gave me a strange look when I came in. "Margaret, I thought you'd be too busy to come to town today." What with all the preparations and all, I must have looked as confused as I felt because she quickly added, "For the wedding, your niece. Everyone's talking about it, biggest event in the valley this summer. They say my grocery list suddenly seemed very unimportant." "What wedding, Judy?" The words came out hardly above a whisper. Judy's face fell. "Oh dear, Rebecca Sanderson. Your sister Diana's girl. They're having this huge destination wedding at Blue Creek Ranch next month. Everyone in town's been hired for something or another. Flowers, catering, valet, parking. Her voice trailed off as she saw my expression. You didn't know. I don't remember much about the drive home. My hands gripped the steering wheel of my old Ford pickup so tight my knuckles turned white. The package on my counter, the fancy car Toby's boy had seen, the missing calls from Diana. It was all starting to make a terrible kind of sense. I pulled into my driveway, and that's when I saw them, a young couple with clipboards walking around my barn, pointing and making notes. I parked and approached them, my heart pounding. Can I help you? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The woman, barely older than a college student, gave me a bright smile. Oh, you must be the caretaker. We're just doing the final measurements for the Peterson-Sanderson wedding. The tent will go here. And we're thinking of hanging bistro lights all through these trees. She gestured at the oak grove Harold and I had planted when we first moved in. The mother of the bride assured us it was all arranged. You'll need to clear out any equipment from the barn by the 15th. We start setup on the 16th. My mouth opened, then closed. Caretaker of my own property? I took a deep breath. I'm Margaret Wilson. I own Blue Creek Ranch, and this is the first I'm hearing about any wedding. Their faces fell in perfect unison. The man quickly pulled out his phone. There must be some mistake. Mrs. Sanderson provided all the permits and approvals. She said her sister was thrilled to host the wedding here. He showed me his screen, where I saw a PDF of what appeared to be a property use agreement with my signature on it. Except it wasn't my signature. Was close enough to fool someone who didn't know better, but the M was all wrong. Harold used to tease me about how my M looked like a mountain range. This one was too neat, too practiced. My sister had forged my signature. I think I said something about calling the police, because the young planners quickly packed up their things and practically ran to their car, promising to get clarification from Mrs. Sanderson immediately. I stood in my driveway long after they'd disappeared. Down the road, my dog, Rusty, whining softly beside me. How could Diana do this? And what exactly had she done? I needed to find out exactly what was happening on my own property. That evening, I did something I'd been putting off for years. I set up the email account my neighbor's granddaughter had created for me on my ancient desktop computer. Once I figured out how to log in, the password was taped to the monitor. I searched for Peterson-Sanderson wedding and nearly fell out of my chair. There it was, a wedding website with a countdown timer showing 32 days until Rebecca and Jason's special day at beautiful Blue Creek Ranch. There were pictures of my property, my home, with captions like, the rustic venue of our dreams and a perfect Montana destination wedding. According to the website, they were expecting 200 guests. 200. The logistics alone made my head spin. Parking, bathrooms, electricity. My ranch wasn't set up for events like this. The website mentioned a rehearsal dinner, the ceremony in the charming authentic barn, and a reception under the stars. 3 days of festivities, all centered around my property, and I hadn't been told a thing. There was even a note about comfortable accommodations arranged in Bozeman for all the guests. At least they weren't planning to sleep in my house. But then I scrolled down further. The family will be staying at the ranch house for an intimate gathering before and after the celebration. My house, they were planning to stay in my house. I picked up the phone and called Diana's number again. This time, she answered. Margaret, I was wondering when you'd call. Her voice was cool, controlled, the same tone she'd used when she told me my choice to stay on the ranch after Harold died was throwing my life away. I could almost see her sitting in her perfect living room, in her perfect house, probably with a glass of white wine in hand. Diana, there are wedding planners on my property. There's a website with pictures of my ranch. What the hell is going on? I rarely swear, but this situation called for it. There was a pause, and then Diana laughed lightly. Oh, Maggie, don't be so dramatic. It's just a small family wedding. Rebecca fell in love with the ranch when she saw pictures, and I knew you'd never use it for anything worthwhile. It's just sitting there, all that land going to waste. This way, it actually serves a purpose for once. My blood boiled. A small wedding. The website says 200 guests, and you forged my signature, Diana. That's a crime. Another pause. I didn't forge anything. I simply helped move things along. Besides, what are you going to do? Call the police on your own family? Create a huge scandal for Rebecca's wedding? You wouldn't dare. The worst part was, she was right. I couldn't bear the thought of ruining Rebecca's wedding, even if her mother had gone about it in the most underhanded way possible. Rebecca had always been kind in her cards, always asking about the ranch and sending pictures of her life. She didn't deserve to have her wedding day destroyed because her mother was a manipulative liar. I took a deep breath. Why didn't you just ask me, Dee? I might have said yes. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Finally, Diana said, because you might have said no, and the ranch was too perfect for Rebecca's vision. I couldn't take that chance. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, Rusty's head in my lap. I was trapped. If I fought this, I'd be the villain who ruined a young couple's wedding. If I went along with it, I was letting my sister walk all over Meokan. I'd have strangers invading my home, using my things, treating my life's work like a rustic backdrop for their perfect photos. I decided to call my friend Eileen, who'd been my rock since Harold passed. They can't just take over your property, she said when I explained the situation. That's trespassing, plain and simple. But it wasn't that simple, and we both knew it. Family never is. The next day, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Rebecca. Aunt Margaret, I just heard from the wedding planners that there's been a misunderstanding. I'm so sorry. Mom told me you were excited to host the wedding. I should have called you directly. Can we talk? My heart softened a bit. Maybe Rebecca hadn't known about her mother's deception. We arranged to speak that evening, and when she called, her voice reminded me so much of Diana when we were young, before life and choices had pulled us in different directions. I feel terrible, Aunt Margaret, Rebecca said. Mom showed me this beautiful ranch in Montana and said it belonged to my aunt, who was thrilled to host my wedding. I should have questioned it, but everything happened so fast. Jason and I were so excited, and before I knew it, deposits were paid, invitations were sent. She trailed off, and I could hear the distress in her voice. The wedding is in 4 weeks. We have people coming from all over the country, some from overseas. Jason's grandmother from Ireland already bought her plane ticket, and she's 92. I closed my eyes, trying to think through the knot of emotions tangling inside me. Rebecca, I barely know you. We've never even met in person. Your mother and I haven't spoken more than a handful of words in decades. And now you want to have your wedding at my home without so much as a proper invitation. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. I know it sounds terrible when you put it like that, and you'd be completely justified in telling us to find another venue. But I'm begging you, Aunt Margaret, please don't punish me for my mother's mistakes. I'll make it up to you somehow, I promise. I've always had a soft spot for people in trouble, even when the trouble was partly of their own making. Harold used to say it was my biggest strength and my worst weakness. I'll think about it, I finally said, but I need to know exactly what your mother has planned, every detail. Rebecca agreed to email me everything and to come out to the ranch the following weekend so we could meet in person. After we hung up, I sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and purple. The same view Harold and I had enjoyed for nearly half a century. Soon, a crowd of strangers would be standing right where I was sitting, drinking champagne and taking selfies. The thought made me feel sick. True to her word, Rebecca sent me a detailed itinerary the next morning. It was worse than I'd imagined. The wedding planners would arrive 2 weeks before the event to begin transformations, their word, not mine. The family, Diana, Robert, their 2 sons and their wives, and Rebecca and her fiancé Jason would arrive 3 days before the wedding. They planned to stay in my house. The barn would be repurposed for the ceremony, with the reception held in a massive tent on the east pasture right where I graze my cattle in the summer. There would be catering, valet, parking, portable restrooms, a dance floor, and enough flowers to fill a greenhouse. The estimated cost made my eyes water. More money than I'd see in 5 years of ranching was being spent on a single weekend. But the detail that broke my heart was this. Family photos will be taken in the ranch house living room, showcasing the authentic rural Montana lifestyle. Authentic rural Montana lifestyle, like my home was some kind of museum. Exhibit, like the life Harold and I had built, was just a quaint backdrop for their perfect wedding album. I closed the email and went out to feed the chickens, fighting back tears the whole time. The week crawled by. I did my chores mechanically, trying to decide what to do. I could still put a stop to it, call the sheriff, change the locks, block the road. But then I'd be the bitter old aunt who ruined Rebecca's wedding. Diana would make sure everyone knew it was my fault. My stubbornness, my cruelty that destroyed her daughter's special day. And what about Rebecca? She seemed genuinely remorseful about the situation. Was it fair to punish her for her mother's deception? By Friday, when Rebecca and Jason were due to arrive for our meeting, I still hadn't made up my mind. I spent the morning cleaning the house, something I rarely bothered with since it was just me and Rusty. I baked a batch of Harold's favorite oatmeal cookies from his mother's recipe. At precisely 2 p.m., a sleek SUV pulled into my driveway. A tall young woman with Diana's high cheekbones but much warmer eyes stepped out, followed by a man with kind eyes and a nervous smile. My niece, her fiancés, strangers who wanted to get married on my land. Aunt Margaret. Rebecca approached hesitantly, as if I might chase her off with a broom. I'm Rebecca. And this is Jason. I nodded, suddenly feeling every one of my 70 years. Come in. I made cookies. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Harold and I had eaten thousands of meals together. Rebecca looked around with genuine interest, not the barely concealed disdain I was used to seeing from Diana. Your home is beautiful, she said, and I could tell she meant it. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Jason cleared his throat. Ms. Wilson, I want you to know that if we had any idea about the miscommunication, we would have approached this completely differently. He seemed sincere, his hand protectively covering Rebecca's on the table. We're prepared to make other arrangements if that's what you decide. Rebecca shot him a panicked look, but he continued. It would be devastating. But we can't in good conscience hold an event somewhere we're not wanted. There was something about his straightforwardness that reminded me of Harold. My late husband had no patience for beating around the bush. Tell it straight or don't tell it at all, he used to say. I studied the young couple across from me. They were in love, that much was clear from the way they kept stealing glances at each other, the way their shoulders touched even though the table was large. I remembered that feeling. The world falls away, and all that matters is the person beside you. I'd like to show you something, I said, standing up. I led them into the living room, where a large photograph hung above the fireplace. It showed a much younger version of myself in a simple white dress, standing next to Harold in his best shirt, both of us beaming in front of the newly built barn. This was our wedding day, September 18, 1976. We couldn't afford anything fancy, so we got married right here on the ranch with just a handful of guests. Your mother was my maid of honor. I pointed to a young Diana, pretty in a blue dress, smiling tightly at the camera. She hated every minute of it. Said her shoes kept sinking into the mud and her hair frizzed in the humidity. Rebecca stared at the photo. I've never seen this before. Mom never showed me any pictures from your wedding. Of course she hadn't. Diana had spent our entire adult lives pretending the ranch and by extension me didn't exist. I turned to face them. Your mother and I have very different ideas about what makes a good life. She never understood why I chose to stay here, especially after Harold passed. She thinks I'm wasting my life taking care of a bunch of cows and fixing fences. I paused, looking out the window at the land that had been my home for nearly 50 years. But this ranch isn't just property to me. It's everything Harold and I built together. Every fence post, every tree, every building has our fingerprints on it. This is our legacy. Rebecca's eyes welled with tears. I understand, Aunt Margaret. We'll find another venue. But, as she said it, her face crumpled slightly, and I knew what it would cost them financially and emotionally to change plans this late. I surprised myself with what I said next. I didn't say I was refusing. I just need you to understand what you're asking to use. I took a deep breath. If that's still an if I agree to let you have your wedding here, there would need to be some ground rules. The hope that flared in their eyes almost made me smile. Almost. First, I stay in my house. You can use the downstairs for your family photos, but the bedrooms are off limits. Your family can stay in Bozeman like the other guests. Rebecca nodded eagerly. Of course, that's totally reasonable, I continued. Second, my cattle need access to water, which means the east pasture is off limits. You'll need to move your reception tent to the south field. Jason was already taking notes on his phone. Third, I need to approve any changes to the barn or property, and everything goes back exactly as it was when you're done. No improvements left behind. We talked for nearly 2 hours, going through every detail of their plans. I vetoed some ideas, releasing butterflies near my vegetable garden, approved others, hanging lights in the oak trees, and suggested alternatives for the rest. By the time they left, we had a handwritten agreement that Jason promised to have typed up and made official. As they were getting in their car, Rebecca turned back. "Thank you, Aunt Margaret. This means more than I can say." I simply nodded, still not entirely sure I was making the right decision. After they drove away, I called Eileen. "You're a better person than I am," she said when I told her what I'd agreed to. "I would have told a lot of them to go jump in the lake. Maybe I should have. But something about Rebecca and Jason had touched me. Perhaps it was seeing a young couple starting out, reminded me of Harold and me, at that age full of dreams and plans. Or maybe I was just getting soft in my old age. Either way, I had just agreed to host a 200-person wedding on my ranch in less than a month. Lord help me. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. True to their word, the wedding planners consulted me on every change, though I could see it pained them to work around my limitations. The young woman who had called me a caretaker, Melissa, was her name, became particularly determined to win me over. "Mrs. Wilson, have you considered how beautiful twinkle lights would look wrapped around the fence posts leading to the barn? Or Mrs. Wilson, what if we created a small lounge area under the big oak tree? Just a few vintage sofas and some lanterns." Sometimes I said yes, sometimes no. But I always made them explain exactly what they planned to do and how they would return things to normal afterward. My phone began ringing constantly with calls from vendors, rental companies, and Diana. I let most of them go to voicemail, especially Diana's. When she realized I had imposed conditions on her perfectly planned event, she was livid. "Margaret, be reasonable," she said in one particularly condescending message. "The wedding party needs to stay at the ranch. It's tradition. And what do you mean we can't use the east pasture? It has the best view of the mountains." I deleted her messages without calling back. She had forged my signature and planned an entire wedding on my property without my knowledge. She was lucky I was allowing it to happen at all. A week before the wedding, the transformation of my ranch began in earnest. Trucks rumbled down my driveway from dawn until dusk. Workers erected an enormous white tent in the south field. Florists arrived with more flowers than I'd ever seen in one place. Someone built a wooden walkway from the house to the barn so guests wouldn't have to walk on actual dirt in their fancy shoes. Through it all, I watched from my porch, rusty at my feet, trying to recognize my own home beneath all the decorations. The final straw came 3 days before the wedding, when Diana herself arrived, accompanied by her husband Robert and their 2 sons with their wives. They pulled up in a caravan of luxury cars, Diana emerging from a black SUV like a queen arriving at her summer palace. She air-kissed my cheeks, her perfume so strong it made my eyes water. "Margaret, darling, the ranch looks divine. You've done wonders with the place." As if I had fixed it up just for her approval. As if the work I'd put in for decades was all leading to this moment, her daughter's wedding. "The hotel in Bosman has your rooms ready," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "The rehearsal dinner starts at 6 tomorrow." Diana's smile faltered. "Don't be ridiculous, Maggie. We're family. Of course, we're staying here." She gestured to the pile of expensive luggage her husband was unloading from the car. "There's plenty of room in this big old house." I stood my ground. "That wasn't our agreement. Diana, Rebecca understood and accepted that your family would stay in town like the other guests." Diana's pleasant mask slipped, revealing the sister I knew all too well. "This is absurd. You're going to make your own sister stay in a hotel when there's a perfectly good house right here. What will people think?" I crossed my arms. "I don't particularly care what people think. Those were the terms Rebecca agreed to, and those are the terms I'm holding to." Diana turned to her husband in outrage. Robert talked some sense into her. Robert, a tall man with the perpetually harried look of someone who spent decades married to my sister, stepped forward. "Margaret, surely we can come to some arrangement. The hotel is booked solid with our other guests. There's nowhere else for us to stay." I didn't believe him for a second. "You had months to plan this wedding, including accommodations. Your poor planning is not my emergency." I pointed to their cars. "The agreement stands. You're not staying in my house." For a moment, I thought Diana might actually stamp her foot like she used to do when we were children, and she didn't get her way. Instead, she narrowed her eyes. "This is about Harold, isn't it? You're still Bitter that he chose this, she waved dismissively at my home, my life over having a real family, while some of us moved on and made something of ourselves instead of hiding away on a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere. If she had slapped me across the face, it couldn't have hurt more. Harold and I had desperately wanted children, but it wasn't in the cards for us. After years of trying, of tests and procedures and heartbreak, we had come to terms with our childlessness. We built our life around the ranch, our animals, our community. It wasn't the family we had dreamed of, but it was ours, and it was full of love. For Diana to throw that in my face now, after everything else she had done, was unforgivable. I must have swayed slightly because suddenly Jason was there, steadying me with a hand on my elbow. I hadn't even noticed him and Rebecca arrive. "Mrs. Sanderson," he said, his voice firm but polite. "We discussed this. Aunt Margaret has been incredibly generous, allowing us to have our wedding here. The least we can do is respect her wishes." Diana turned her glare on him. "This doesn't concern you, Jason. This is between me and my sister." Rebecca stepped forward then, placing herself between her mother and me. "Actually, Mom, it concerns all of us. This is Aunt Margaret's home, and we're guests here. We agreed to stay at the hotel, and that's what we're going to do." I had never been prouder of someone I barely knew. Diana looked from Rebecca to Jason to me. Realizing she was outnumbered, "Fine," she snapped. "We'll stay at the hotel. But this isn't over. Margaret," she stormed back to her car, Robert trailing behind with the luggage. Her sons and their wives, who had wisely stayed out of the confrontation, followed suit. After they drove away, Rebecca turned to me, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I am so sorry about that, Aunt Margaret. I had no idea she would try to bulldoze you like that." I patted her arm. "I've known your mother a lot longer than you have, dear. This is mild compared to some of our arguments." Jason checked his watch. "We should probably head into town too. The florists need final approval on the centerpieces." Rebecca nodded, then hesitated. "Will you be okay here by yourself?" The concern in her voice touched me. "I've been okay by myself for 5 years," I reminded her. "Go on, take care of your wedding details. I'll see you tomorrow." That night, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I thought about what Diana had said. Was I hiding here on the ranch? Had I used this place as an excuse to avoid moving on after Harold died? Maybe there was a grain of truth to her accusation, but it didn't change the fact that this was my home, my choice, and Diana had no right to steamroll over my life for her own purposes. I went to bed early that night, exhausted from the confrontation and dreading the days ahead. The rehearsal the next day went as well as could be expected. Diana barely spoke to me, which was a blessing. Rebecca and Jason were so caught up in last-minute details that they hardly had time to breathe, let alone mediate family drama. I spent most of the evening sitting quietly at the back of the tent, watching as the wedding party practiced walking down the aisle that had been created in my barn. The space was hardly recognizable. The walls were draped with white fabric, hiding the worn wood and years of use. Elaborate flower arrangements stood where we used to stack hay. Bales, crystal chandeliers hung from the rafters. It was beautiful, I had to admit, but it wasn't my barn anymore. After everyone left, I walked through the transformed space, touching the decorations lightly. Tomorrow, this place would be filled with people celebrating Rebecca and Jason's love. And then they would all leave, taking their fancy clothes and champagne glasses with them. The decorations would come down, the flowers would wilt, and I would be left with, what? The same ranch I'd always had, but somehow different, changed by having been seen through other people's eyes. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect Montana June days that seemed to go on forever. I stayed in my house while an army of workers made final preparations. Diana had made it clear I wasn't needed or wanted until the ceremony itself, which was fine by me. I spent the morning doing my regular chores, feeding the chickens, checking on my small herd of cattle that had been moved to the north pasture for the occasion, making sure Rusty had enough water, normal things in the midst of the chaos. By early afternoon, cars began arriving. Men in black suits directed traffic, showing guests where to park in the makeshift lot that had been created on what used to be my winter wheat field. I watched from my kitchen window as people in formal attire made their way toward the barn, programs in hand, exclaiming over the beauty of the ranch. I had decided to attend the ceremony. It seemed wrong not to, somehow, but I wasn't going to the reception afterward. I had agreed to let them use my property, not to celebrate with people I didn't know. I changed into the nicest dress I owned, a simple blue affair I'd bought for a neighbor's funeral last year. I pinned my silver hair up as best I could and even put on a bit of lipstick. Harold would have teased me about getting all dolled up, but he would have appreciated the effort. Just as I was about to leave the house, there was a knock at the door. It was Jason, looking handsome in his tuxedo but distinctly nervous. "Aunt Margaret," he said, though we both knew I wasn't actually his aunt yet. "I was hoping you might do me a favor." Before I could ask what kind of favor, a loud commotion erupted from the direction of the barn. Raised voices, a woman crying. Jason winced. That would be Rebecca's cousin, Natalie. She was supposed to walk down the aisle with me, but she just found out her boyfriend cheated on her, and now she's refusing to participate if he's going to be there. Family drama, some things never change, no matter how fancy the wedding. "What does that have to do with me?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. Jason ran a hand through his carefully styled hair. "I know it's a lot to ask, but would you consider walking me down the aisle? You're Rebecca's only aunt, and it would mean the world to her, to both of us." I stared at him. Speechless me. In the wedding party, Diana would have a conniption. But then I thought of Rebecca, stressed and upset on what should be the happiest day of her life. And I thought of how little I had been part of her life until now. No birthdays, no graduations, no holidays, just Christmas cards on my refrigerator. "I'll need a few minutes to change," I said finally. "This isn't exactly wedding party attire." Jason's face lit up. "You don't need to change. You look perfect. The ceremony starts in 15 minutes. Perfect was a stretch, but there wasn't time to argue. I grabbed my grandmother's cameo brooch from my jewelry box, something old for the occasion, and pinned it to my dress. "All right then," I said, taking a deep breath. "Let's go." Walking toward the barn, arm in arm with Jason. I could see Diana standing near the entrance, her face a storm cloud when she spotted us. "What is she doing?" I heard her hiss to Robert. "Where's Natalie?" Jason squeezed my arm reassuringly. "Change of plans, Mrs. Sanderson. Aunt Margaret has graciously agreed to take Natalie's place." Before Diana could object, the wedding planner was ushering us into position. The music began, a string quartet playing something classical that I didn't recognize. Pairs of groomsmen and bridesmaids started down the aisle, and then it was our turn. As Jason and I stepped into the barn, I was momentarily blinded by the transformation. Hundreds of tiny lights twinkled overhead. White roses and babies breath lined the aisle. The guests, all 200 of them, turned to watch us pass. I concentrated on not tripping, on keeping pace with Jason, on breathing, one foot in front of the other, just like any other day on the ranch, except with better lighting and far fancier company. We reached the front, where Ann Arbor had been constructed beneath the oak beam where Harold and I had carved our initials. The same beam that had supported the roof of this barn through blizzards and heat waves and everything in between. I gave Jason's arm a final squeeze before taking my place on the bride's side. Diana, seated in the front row, glared daggers at me. I smiled serenely back, channeling every ounce of Harold's don't give a damn attitude. The music changed, and everyone stood. Rebecca appeared in the doorway on her father's arm, radiant in a gown that probably cost more than my truck. But it was her smile that caught my attention, bright and genuine, lighting up her entire face as she looked at Jason. Waiting for her, young love, I thought, so full of hope and possibility. I glanced at the oak beam above, at our carved initials. Harold and I had been married for 42 years before cancer took him. We'd had our share of hope and possibility too, and we'd made the most of it. The ceremony began, the priest's voice echoing in the transformed barn. He spoke about love and commitment, about joining not just to people but to families. I found myself unexpectedly moved by his words. Family had always been a complicated concept for me. After our parents died, Diana and I had drifted further and further apart, until we were barely more than strangers who happened to share blood. But here, witnessing her daughter's wedding in my barn, our family barn, I felt a connection I hadn't felt in years. The priest asked Rebecca and Jason to repeat their vows. They had written their own, full of promises and inside jokes that made the guests chuckle. As I watched them pledge their lives to each other, I thought about the promises Harold and I had made in this very spot. Different words, simpler ceremony, same commitment. I was so lost in memory that I almost missed it when the priest said, "Before we proceed, I'd like to acknowledge the special significance of this place where we gather today." The barn fell silent. I looked up, confused, as the priest continued. "We are blessed to be celebrating this union at Blue Creek Ranch, which has been in Jason's new family for 3 generations. This ranch represents decades of love, hard work, and dedication, values that we hope will guide Rebecca and Jason in their marriage." He smiled at me, and I realized with a start that this hadn't been in the program. This was something he had added himself. "I believe the owner of this beautiful property, Margaret Wilson, Rebecca's aunt, is with us today. Would you please stand, Ms. Wilson?" Hundreds of heads turned toward me as I rose slowly to my feet, my face burning. The priest nodded encouragingly. "Ms. Wilson has graciously opened her home to us today, allowing Rebecca and Jason to begin their journey together in a place steeped in family history and love. For that, we are deeply grateful." There was a smattering of applause, which grew stronger as the priest continued. "In honor of this generosity, Rebecca and Jason have asked me to share that they will be establishing a college scholarship fund for local ranching families, named after Ms. Wilson and her late husband Harold. The Wilson Scholarship will help ensure that the ranching tradition in Paradise Valley continues for generations to come." I sank back into my seat, overwhelmed. A scholarship named after us. I looked at Rebecca and Jason, who were both smiling at me with genuine warmth. When had they planned this? And how had they known exactly what would mean the most to me? Not money, not recognition, but a commitment to the way of life that Harold and I had devoted ourselves to. A tear slipped down my cheek, and I didn't bother to wipe it away. The priest cleared his throat. "I believe the actual owner of this property has just arrived." Those were the words I heard when I entered the barn that day, standing frozen in the doorway. But that's not how it happened at all. That was just my nightmare, my fear of being an outsider at a wedding on my own land. The reality was something different entirely, something unexpected and, in its own way, healing. The ceremony continued with the exchange of rings and the traditional pronouncement. As Rebecca and Jason shared their first kiss as husband and wife, the guests erupted in applause. The newlyweds practically danced back down the aisle, followed by the wedding party. I found myself walking alongside one of Jason's uncles, a kind-faced man who complimented me on the ranch and asked thoughtful questions about its history. By the time we exited the barn, I was actually enjoying myself. Outside, guests mingled while the photographer arranged people for formal pictures. I tried to slip away, heading toward my house, when I heard Diana call my name. I turned reluctantly, bracing for another confrontation. But her face wasn't angry. If anything, she looked uncertain, maybe even a little embarrassed. "The photographer wants a picture of Rebecca with both mothers," she said stiffly. "And you?" I followed her to where Rebecca was posing with Jason and his parents. When she saw me, she broke away and embraced me. First real hug we'd ever shared. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." I hugged her back. This niece I barely knew but was starting to care for deeply. "You're welcome, dear." It was a beautiful ceremony. Diana stood nearby, watching us with an unreadable expression. When Rebecca released me, I nodded at my sister. A truce, of sorts, for today, at least. The photographer arranged us in front of the barn, Diana and Robert on one side of the couple, Jason's parents on the other, and me slightly off-center. As the camera clicked, I thought about how strange life can be. A month ago, I was just an old woman living alone on a ranch, sending Christmas cards to a niece I'd never met. Now, I was part of a wedding, part of a family moment that would be preserved in albums and frames for years to come. After the photos, the guests moved toward the tent in the south field for the reception. I had planned to excuse myself at this point, to retreat to my house and let the celebration continue without me. But Rebecca caught my arm. "You are coming to the reception, aren't you, Aunt Margaret?" The hope in her eyes made it impossible to say no. "I suppose I could make an appearance," I conceded. Just for a little while. The reception was as lavish as I'd expected. A 5-course meal, an open bar, a live band. I was seated at a table with some of Jason's relatives, who turned out to be surprisingly good company. His grandmother from Ireland, the 92-year-old who had made the journey across the ocean, regaled me with stories of her own farm back home. "Not as grand as this," she said, gesturing at the surrounding mountains. but it's been in our family for 6 generations now. As the evening progressed, I found myself actually enjoying the celebration. I sipped champagne, I made conversation, I even laughed at the best man's jokes during his toast. When the dancing started, I watched from my table, tapping my foot to the music. Jason's uncle, the one I'd walked down the aisle with, asked me to dance, and to my own surprise, I accepted. It had been years since I'd danced with anyone other than Harold, but it felt good to move to the music, to be part of the joy filling the tent. During a break in the music, Diana approached my table. She had a glass of wine in her hand and a determined look on her face. "May I sit?" she asked, indicating the empty chair beside me. I nodded, preparing myself for whatever was coming. She sat down, smoothing her expensive dress. "The scholarship was Rebecca's idea," she said without preamble. "She researched it, set it all up. Apparently, she's been following your ranch's social media for years. Did you know you had social media?" I shook my head, bewildered. "I don't have any social media." Diana smiled slightly. "The Paradise Valley Ranchers Association does. They featured Blue Creek Ranch in a post last year, something about sustainable grazing practices. Rebecca saw it and recognized the name from all those Christmas cards you sent. She started following everything she could find about the ranch. About you." I didn't know what to say. All this time, I thought those Christmas cards had been going into a void. But Rebecca had been paying attention, had been curious about this aunt she'd never met, this ranch she'd only heard about. Diana took a sip of her wine. "I should have told you about the wedding. I know that. But I was afraid." She nearly choked on the word. Diana had never been good at admitting fear or wrongdoing. "Afraid of what?" I asked. She looked out at the dance floor where Rebecca and Jason were swaying together, lost in their own world. "Afraid you'd say no. Afraid you'd still hated me after all these years. Afraid you'd tell Rebecca all the terrible things I've said about the ranch, about your life choices." She turned back to me. "I was wrong, Margaret, about a lot of things. Seeing you today, seeing how you've maintained this place on your own, how you've built a life here, I was wrong." It wasn't quite an apology, but from Diana, it was monumental. I studied my sister's face, seeing the years etched there, the same genetic material that had shaped my own features, just arranged slightly differently. "We took different paths," I said finally. "That doesn't make either of us wrong, just different." Diana nodded slowly. "Different," she repeated. "Yes." We sat in silence for a moment, watching the celebration unfold around us. Then Diana said, "Robert and I are considering downsizing. The house in Chicago is too big for just the two of us now that the kids are gone. We've been looking at places in Montana, actually. Bozeman has quite a nice arts scene, I'm told." My eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You mean Montana?" Diana shrugged, a gesture so reminiscent of our childhood that it made my heart ache. "Stranger things have happened. Besides, if Rebecca and Jason start a family, I'd like to be closer." The implication hung in the air between us. Closer to Rebecca and Jason would mean closer to me as well, closer to Blue Creek Ranch, a chance, perhaps, to rebuild what had been broken between us decades ago. "Bozeman's only an hour's drive from here," I said carefully. "If you did move there," Diana nodded. "That's what the real estate agent mentioned. Easy access to Paradise Valley." Another silence, more comfortable this time. The band started up again, a slower number that had couples returning to the dance floor. Diana finished her wine. "Well, I should get back to Robert. He's hopeless at small talk without me." She stood, smoothing her dress again. "The wedding was beautiful. Margaret, thank you for everything." She hesitated, then leaned down and kissed my cheek before walking away. I touched the spot where her lips had been, feeling like something monumental had just happened, though I couldn't quite name it. The reception continued late into the night. I stayed much longer than I'd planned, caught up in the celebration and the unexpected reconnection with my sister. When I finally made my excuses and headed back to my house, the party was still going strong. I could hear the music from my porch, could see the lights twinkling in the oak trees. I sat for a while in my favorite chair, Rusty snoring at my feet, watching the festivities from a distance. The next morning, I woke early as usual. The ranch was eerily quiet after the noise and bustle of the wedding. I made my coffee and stepped outside, expecting to find the aftermath of the celebration: discarded cups, forgotten shoes, general disarray. Instead, I found a cleaning crew already hard at work. They had clearly been at it for hours, removing all traces of the wedding with impressive efficiency. The tent in the south field was already half dismantled. The parking area was nearly empty of cars. Even the walkway from the house to the barn was being taken apart, board by board. I walked toward the barn, curious to see what remained of the transformation. The white drapery had been removed from the walls, revealing the familiar weathered wood. The chandeliers were gone, the flower arrangements cleared away. It was my barn again, though somehow it felt different. I ran my hand along the oak beam where Harold and I had carved our initials all those years ago. The carving was still there, unchanged, HW plus MW76, a testament to endurance, to love that lasts. A sound behind me made me turn. Rebecca stood in the doorway, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater. "Good morning," she said. "I hope we didn't wake you with the cleanup." I shook my head. "I've been getting up with the sun for 50 years. Old habits." She walked over to join me by the beam, looking up at the carved initials. "The wedding planner wanted to cover that up with flowers," she confessed. I told her absolutely not. It's the heart of the barn. The reason I wanted to get married here in the first place. I looked at her in surprise. "You knew about this, about the carving?" Rebecca nodded. "Remember that social media post Mom mentioned? There was a picture of the barn interior, and you could just make out the carving in the background. I zoomed in, figured out what it was. It made the barn feel, I don't know, blessed, somehow, like it had already witnessed a successful marriage and might bring us luck too. Something warm unfurled in my chest. This young woman, this niece I'd barely known, had seen value in what Harold and I had built together, had wanted some of that same enduring love for her own marriage, had chosen my barn not because it was rustic or authentic or picturesque, but because it represented something real and lasting. "I think Harold would have liked that," I said softly. "He was a romantic at heart, though he'd have denied it to his dying day." Rebecca smiled. "I wish I could have met him." I nodded. "Me too." We stood in companionable silence for a moment, looking up at the carving. Then Rebecca said, "Jason and I are staying in Bozeman for a few more days before our honeymoon. We were hoping maybe you'd come into town for dinner. There's a nice steakhouse near the hotel." The invitation was so unexpected, so genuine, that it took me a moment to find my voice. "I'd like that," I said finally. "Just let me know when." We walked back to the house together, talking easily about the wedding, about her plans for the scholarship, about my cattle and the coming hay season. By the time we reached the porch, Diana and Robert were emerging from their car. Diana looked as immaculate as ever, despite the early hour. "Rebecca, darling, are you ready? We have brunch reservations in town." She nodded at me, more cordial than she'd been since arriving. "Margaret, Mom, I invited Aunt Margaret to have dinner with us before we leave for the honeymoon," Rebecca said. Diana paused, and I could see her weighing her response. Then, to my astonishment, she said, "Why don't you join us for brunch today as well, Margaret? The restaurant is supposed to be excellent." It was an olive branch, small but significant. "Thank you," I said, "but I have chores that can't wait. Rain's coming this afternoon." I nodded toward the gathering clouds on the horizon. A rancher's excuse, but a valid one. Diana nodded, accepting my decision without argument. Another small miracle. As they prepared to leave, Rebecca embraced me again. "Thank you for everything, Aunt Margaret. This was more perfect than I ever could have imagined." She lowered her voice. "And I think Mom might actually be coming around." I hugged her back. "Stranger things have happened," I said, echoing Diana's words from the night before. Rebecca laughed. "We'll call you about dinner," she promised as she climbed into the car. I watched them drive away, standing on my porch until the dust from their tires settled. The ranch was quiet again, just me and Rusty and the wind in the oak trees. But something had changed. The isolation I had felt since Harold's death seemed less absolute somehow. There was a thread connecting me to the wider world against Rebecca and Jason, to their future children perhaps, maybe even to Diana in some new, tentative way. I called Eileen later that day, after I'd finished my chores and the predicted rain was pattering on the roof. "You were right," she said when I told her about the wedding, the scholarship, Diana's olive branch. "About what?" I asked. "About letting them have the Wedding here, about not letting bitterness win. I thought about that for a moment. Maybe I conceded. Or maybe I just got lucky that it turned out well. Eileen laughed. In my experience, luck favors those who keep their hearts open. Harold used to say that, remember? I did remember. It was one of his favorite sayings, especially when we were going through hard times, drought years, financial struggles, the heartbreak of childlessness. Keep your heart open, Maggie, and good things will find their way in. I hadn't thought about that in years. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, listening to the rain. The wedding was over. The decorations were gone. My barn was just a barn again. My ranch just a ranch. But I was different. I had taken a risk, opened my home to family who had hurt me, and found something unexpected: connection, possibility, maybe even the beginnings of reconciliation. On my refrigerator, held in place by a faded fruit-shaped magnet, was a new addition to my collection. Not a Christmas card this time, but a wedding invitation. Rebecca Sanderson and Jason Peterson request the honor of your presence. It had arrived in the mail the day after I met them, a formality since I was already well aware of the event, but I had put it on my refrigerator anyway, next to all those Christmas cards I had saved over the years, a visible reminder that sometimes opening your door and your heart to family is worth the risk. I took the invitation down and turned it over. On the back, Rebecca had written a note to my Aunt Margaret, whose strength and independence have inspired me from afar. Thank you for being part of our special day. Love, Rebecca. I traced the words with my finger, thinking of all the years I had felt invisible to my sister's family, but I hadn't been invisible, not completely. Rebecca had been watching, learning, finding value in the life I had built. And now, perhaps, we could build something new. Together, a relationship, a connection, a bridge between my world and hers. As I sit here now, telling you this story, I can look out my window and see the barn where it all happened. The oak beam, with our initials, is still there, still strong after all these years. Last month, Rebecca and Jason brought their new puppy to visit a gangly black lab who immediately became Rusty's best friend. Diana and Robert have put a deposit on a condo in Bozeman, though I'll believe that when I see moving trucks. Some wounds take more than a wedding to heal completely. But here's what I've learned, what I want to share with you. Life rarely goes according to plan. Sometimes people use your barn for a wedding without asking. Sometimes family hurts you in ways that seem unforgivable. And sometimes, when you least expect it, healing begins in the most unlikely circumstances. If you're listening to this and thinking about a relationship that seems beyond repair, I urge you to consider what might happen if you opened your door. Just a crack. You never know what might come through a wedding, a reconnection, a second chance. I'm Margaret Wilson, and this is my story. I'm recording this from my kitchen table at Blue Creek Ranch, with Rusty snoring at my feet and rain tapping on the roof. If this story reminds you of someone in your life, someone you've lost touch with, someone you missed despite everything, share this with them. Save it for the day when you're ready to reach out. And remember that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings can come from the most painful endings. Thank you for listening.